Welcome back to the Bonsai Builders podcast. I'm your host, Addison. We often talk to guests who've been in bonsai for years, even decades. But today, we're taking a different approach. We're exploring the very beginning of a journey, one that starts right after another long journey ends. My guest is a new friend, Mark Walker. For 40 years, he was a professional chef, working with precision, passion, and intense pressure in the kitchen. Now, newly retired, he's channeling that creative energy into other pursuits, bonsai being one of them. We're going to talk about that major life transition and discover the fascinating connections between crafting a perfect dish and cultivating a living sculpture. Mark, thanks so much for joining me.
Thank you, Addison. I'm super excited to be here. It's been nice getting to know you a little bit. I think this will be a lot of fun.
Yeah, I appreciate all the feedback you've given on the podcast, and it was fun to meet you at Jonas's initially and then up at the Rebs show. So I wanted to start with, after 4 decades as a chef, what does retirement actually feel like? How have things been, and when did you retire?
Well, there's a story there. I actually was retired. It was a year, July 1st, and I kind of accidentally retired. I still own a part of a catering company. July was always a super slow month, so I volunteered to take a month off to save payroll, and they just never went back, which is just fine with me. I talked to my partner and he's like, we're doing okay. And I'm like, you got it? Okay. Then I'm going to go do bonsai and yoga and ride off into the sunset. I got married in August of last year. So a newlywed and enjoying time with my wife. And I've got some resources and it seemed like a good time to retire.
That's awesome. Congrats on the wedding and the retirement, by the way. I have a few questions that brought up for me. One is your wife also retired? Like, are you both kind of on the same schedule now?
No, I'm waiting for her. She's October of next year. She's going to retire. And then we have grand plans for a lot of travel. We're planning on travel for like 6 months, which means I'm going to have to get my bonsai taken care of. But I have some thoughts on that. Yeah, I retired. I was 61 when I retired. She's holding out until she's 65 with good reason. She loves what she does, et cetera, et cetera. But she's not retired yet.
Nice. And then, you mentioned that it was kind of serendipity that you ended up retiring, but was it something you'd been edging towards where you're like, oh yeah, I am making these changes to my life or changing my hours at the business, or did it kind of catch you by surprise?
Yeah, it was a journey. The pandemic was incredibly hard, as you can imagine, for all food service businesses, but catering in particular. I mean, the bottom just fell out of the catering market when the pandemic started. So I had to switch my business model on the fly to basically, DoorDash and that kind of thing to keep the doors open. It was a long, hard slog and it was a fight. And then when things opened back up, I was pretty fried, pretty burnt out. I took on a partner in the company. Basically I merged my company with a hospitality group, retained a small part of it, went out and got a commercial real estate license and discovered that I had no patience for that. So I went back and ran the kitchen for, probably a year until, like I said, I accidentally retired. But it feels very good.
Nice. I'm curious, when did your bonsai journey start? Was that post-retirement, or had you already been into it before you?
No, I remember one of the first trees I got was a redwood from Bob Scheinman, and I had it delivered to the kitchen because it was coming in a big box, as those things do. And, it came and I was all excited and I opened it up and pulled it out and my crew in the kitchen were like, chef, well, what are you doing? I'm like, don't worry about it. It's a redwood. Everything's fine. Go back to work. So, it started before. I mean, I'd always loved gardening, but prior to retirement, it was a lot of vegetable gardening, herb gardening. I would grow a lot of edible blossoms for garnishing plates and things, but it was that. So I kind of had a love for gardening and an interest in bonsai, but then I started looking into it, and I think I might have mentioned this to you. I reached out to Eric Schrader and asked for a tour of his garden at his house, and he sent me his address, and he was literally 300 yards from my house over here on Bernal Hill. So I met him and started buying bonsai from him, and here I am.
Yeah, what has your learning process been like so far? Has the majority of your learning been from in-person teaching, or are you consuming content online? Where are you getting most of your knowledge so far?
Mostly, I would say that I learn best from teaching, and maybe that's a function of my career as a chef. It's all hands on. And of course, I would look at cookbooks and, find a recipe kind of thing, but my brain responds best to hand on. I read some books. I watch videos when I have a specific question, and I can find a YouTube that seems to respond to it. But yeah, the in-person teaching has been the best for me.
That makes sense. I was talking with Andrew on the episode probably prior to this. It hasn't released yet, but that was a big component that he said that hands-on learning really is, there's no substitute for it in bonsai.
Andrew
So it
Robson.
makes sense. Yes. Yep.
Andrew, if you're listening, I'm moving up to your area. Looking forward to working with you.
Yeah, you should listen to the episode. He had some interesting things to say about folks coming and visiting and volunteering. So sure that could be a great connection. When you, what does your day-to-day look like now that you retired? Like, obviously you probably have a lot more free time. And so I'm wondering, bonsai is one component of this, but can you give me, an idea of, how are you envisioning bonsai being a part of your life going forward?
I tend to be an all-in kind of guy, and especially when it comes to hobbies, I may have over purchased gadgets. I'm a little bit of a gadget guy. So when I get on something, I'm like, I don't just need one pair of scissors. I probably need these 4 pairs of scissors. So let me go ahead and do that. I saw your mini stand the other day and I was like, oh, I need that. But, my day to day, it's probably largely what you would expect in retirement. Although I will say, there's days when I'm like, I'm supposed to be retired. Why do I feel like I'm running all day? Because I do have an active social life. I work on my bonsai. I'm consistent with that. I do yoga as often as I can. I belong to some men's groups that I participate in that are very gratifying. Meditation, that kind of thing. And I won't say that I don't sneak a nap in once in a while. So it's pretty glorious, I'll tell you.
Yeah, that sounds awesome. Something I've always worried about is whenever I want to transition to retirement, I don't want to get to retirement and then find that, I have the financial means to do so, but I don't actually have any things that I want to do. Like, I don't have any interests, or I don't have any, what am I going to fill that time with? What is my life going to be, right? And it sounds like you didn't have any of that struggle. Like, you transitioned fairly naturally into living, I guess.
Yeah, I did. I'm good at entertaining myself. I know my wife has those same concerns, which is part of why she's, I won't say dragging her feet on retiring, but because she loves what she's doing. But that has been a frequent topic of conversations. Like, what am I going to do? What she doesn't know is that she's got a bunch of hobbies that she's just going to, fall into, things that I, watch her do. And I'm like, yeah, you'll be doing that. Your time, your effort expands to fill the time allotted, kind of thing. So I find myself very busy.
Makes sense. Yeah, and it's probably different for different folks too. Something I've been thinking about is, just that, making that transition gradual. So I'm not like 100 to 0, work to not work. It's more of a transition. And I've been putting more energy into things like bonsai and making connections with folks in the community, so that whenever I don't have that work community that's taking up a big part of my time, then there's another community that I can invest in.
Yeah. Well, also, life in the kitchen is a grind. I was a professional chef my whole time, and, rose up the ranks to executive chef. And that's kind of, you go into work at 11 or noon and get out of the kitchen at midnight or 1. And that went on for years and years. And then I started opening my own catering companies because I had the brilliant idea, well, I'll just be self-employed. And it turns out being self-employed is, once again, a grind. I mean, I literally, it's a long story, but it's like, one time I went to Paris on vacation, and my salesperson called and said, hey, can we do 2,500 people on Thursday at the Warfield? And I was like, I guess, I've got my computer. So, we made it happen, but it's like, it's a slog. So I guess that's a long way of saying, by the time I retired, I'm like, okay, I'm ready to chill out a little bit.
Makes sense. Yeah, my brother actually is a sushi chef, and he's told me about it's really, really grueling work being in the kitchen. And he actually, I worked there one day at the restaurant he works at. I almost chopped my finger off, unfortunately, but it was very fun. It was fun to do for one day, but when those orders are coming really quickly, and it's a lot of heat and moving around, so it's very
Yeah.
physically demanding.
My younger son's the saucier at a Michelin starred restaurant here in San Francisco. And, he has a business degree, but he wanted to work in the kitchen for a while. So he got this job. And he says it's the most intense thing he's ever done. And I'm like, yep, this is what Dad did.
Yeah, that makes sense. But I mean, probably have this immense confidence that the things that you want to do now, like you have the capability to do, and you have the energy from being that physically active for such a long period. So going through tough things, I guess, leads you to have confidence in your capabilities going forward.
Absolutely.
So that kind of brings me to, do you think there's any parallels between bonsai and the kind of being a chef? Like, do you think there's anything that you're taking from your time doing that? You're like, oh, I'm starting off a leg up in bonsai because of this or that experience or this or that capability.
No, I certainly don't think I'm starting a leg up in anything, but consistency and good habits are, I think, as important in bonsai as it is in the kitchen. If you cook a dish 30 different ways, then people are going to, they'll have it one time, they're like, oh, that was amazing. And they'll come another time and want to have that dish again. They're like, well, what is this? So the same thing with bonsai. It's like, you have to be consistent with your watering. You have to be consistent with your fertilizing. You got to do the right thing at the right time. Whether it's, well, I'm going to repot in the spring, I'm going to, pinch buds, I'm going to decandle in the summer, all those things. So it's consistency, probably thoroughness. I love spending a bunch of hours sitting and needle pulling on black pines, which, when I tell my non-bonsai friends, what'd you do today? Oh, I spent 4.5 hours, needle pulling. They're like, I'm sorry, what? You did? I'm like, trust me, it was good, and I enjoyed it.
I don't know if you listened to the first episode or some of my talks with Jonas, but we're tentatively throwing out this model of this like 4 components of bonsai, that make up the art or the hobby of horticulture, technique, aesthetic or artistry, and then like the time or habits component. And it sounds like what you're saying is a lot of those pieces that fall into like the discipline, time, like relationship of bonsai with time, like habits, your experience in the kitchen requires a lot of those things. And so you're able to transition those really easily into bonsai.
Yeah, I think both things are time sensitive. Probably bonsai has a somewhat larger window. I always said, and I keep on digressing back to cooking, but, I did a lot of weddings with my catering company, and it was very time sensitive. I always said, I can't call the bride on Thursday and say, we're not going to have your food quite ready on Saturday, so we're going to need to push your wedding to Monday. That doesn't fly. Failure is not an option. And I think with bonsai, it's the same thing. Like I said, you need to do the right thing at the right time within a certain window.
Makes sense. The other thing, actually, I'm curious on your thoughts on this. I had my brother teach me how he sharpens his sushi knives. So that I can take care of my bonsai tools. Do you feel like from your kitchen experience, like some of that like tool care and tool sharpening is like applicable to bonsai?
Well, I'll tell you a shameful secret, which is that I never had the patience to sharpen my own stuff, so I always had them professionally sharpened. There's some really good places in town, and I suspect when the time comes, I will probably bring my bonsai equipment to them and have them sharpen it. I mean, I can put an edge on it. I can keep it sharp. But when it really needs cleaned up, then I take it to the professionals. Not the least of which, I mentioned before that I was a gadget guy. I have a ton of knives. And now I have a ton of bonsai gear. So it's time consuming. And like I said, for needle pulling, something like that, for some reason, I have a ton of patience. For sharpening a knife, not so much.
That's funny. So I want to digress a little bit to this gadget guy
Sure.
piece. I feel like I also tend to overbuy tools. Like I'm like, oh, I need that carving thing. That would be great for this specific thing. And now I have, 8 different sets of carving tools that are a little bit different shape or size or whatever, right? And, I don't really need all of them. I'm curious, has there been one tool or like a few tools that you're like, wow, I'm really glad I got this? And then has there been any tools where you're like, I probably didn't need that, or that's been duplicative? I'm wondering if I know you're fairly early in your journey, but wondering if you've already had some best buys or some regrets.
Well, again, the analogy I would make is just seconds ago said that I have a ton of knives. But over and over and over again, it's the 6-inch chef knife I grabbed for, and I probably did 80% of my stuff with a 6-inch chef knife, unless it was something more specialized. I needed a boning knife or slicing knife or something. So bonsai, I don't regret any of the tweezers that I bought. I have 3 pairs of tweezers that all kind of have a different thing. I have 3 pairs. Well, really, I have 2 pairs of good scissors and then a couple other pairs of not so good scissors. I don't regret buying those. I did buy a grafting knife, and I'm nowhere close to grafting things in my bonsai career yet. So, that'll sit comfortably in my bag until I'm ready to use it. But I mean, I don't regret anything that I've bought, but there's some things I reach for over and over again, and some things that just kind of ride around.
Yeah, it makes sense. Once I really hone in on like these are the tools that I really like, I'll probably do an episode on, or I don't know, maybe some kind of video content or something to go through them, because yeah, I feel like I could really narrow my collection of, I'm just looking at my workshop closet. I could narrow my collection of tools down to, probably a 20th or a 10th of a fifth of the amount of tools that I have, and like still have the exact same effectiveness. So yeah, it's a funny thing about the hobby. I feel like that's a lot of hobbies, like woodworking or anything, right? You if you're that kind of person, then you're going to end up with a lot of tools. Nothing wrong with that. And supporting Jonas with all the tools that he imports. So
yeah, he hasn't ever stopped me from buying anything.
Exactly. I think part of it is all these tools are really useful. It's how they're applied. And so you need to learn from someone who uses that specific tool, and then you'll be very effective with it. So it's almost like if you buy a tool that nobody around you uses, even if it's a good tool, it might be hard for you to master, right? And so I've found the best success with like mirroring people that I actually work with, like Adam or, whoever, right? Using the same tool that they use. And then when I'm learning with them, I get better at using that tool and more effective. I'm wondering, what are your goals in bonsai? Like, I don't know if you're someone who like writes down your goals or has quarterly planning and things like that, but I'm curious, have you thought about like what you're trying to do with all your time that you're investing in bonsai?
Well, it's funny, I saw that question, and my immediate response was, my goal is to win best in show at the Kokufu, but is that attainable? Not in my lifetime, probably. My goal is to have the best showpieces that I can. And I've always been baffled. I mean, I've had people ask, well, do you just want a nice tree, or do you want like something that could be a show tree? And I'm always like, and it's not because I am, vain or competitive and I want to put something in the show. I think I'm probably easily 5 years away from putting a plant in a show. I think I have trees that are heading in that direction. I specifically have sought those out. I would like to show things, but I guess the short answer to your question is I want the best trees that I'm able to acquire and maintain and develop. I bought a really nice exposed root black pine from Jonas because I went to him and I said, hey, I want to spend some money on a tree that I can show in the not too distant future, but I don't want to buy my way into the show. I don't want to buy something that's show ready. I want something that is heading in that direction that I can work on under his guidance and get it there. So I want to earn it.
That makes sense. That's kind of a attitude that I share, the attitude of when I put something in a show, I want it to represent like work that I've done, right? Mm-hmm. And I don't think that there's nothing wrong with a professional doing all the work on a tree or like buying a finished tree. But I'm curious, where do you think that desire for the work to be your own comes from?
Well, I mean, let me digress for a second and say once again, actually, I guess tomorrow is September. I'll turn 62 in September. So I don't have 35 years to, plant a pine seed and get it there. Although I have a bunch of pine seeds that I'm going to plant just because I want that experience. And actually, this is advice that I got from Jay McDonald. Because he's an older guy too, and he's like, you got to buy advanced material if you want to get anywhere at our age. And so, but to answer your question of the desire to do something, I mean, I guess it comes from having been, self-employed for as long as I was and kind of figuring it out on my own and doing stuff. And I liked like I said, I had catering companies. I was also executive chef in restaurants. And it was always really nice when you would put together a beautiful plate and put it out there for people to eat. And they'd be like, wow, that's really great. So, I'm looking forward to being able to show somebody, a plant that I have that has been under my care for a period of time that I can point to and say, I got this to this point, and have people say, wow, that's really nice.
Yeah, I think that's part of it for me too, that like external validation of this craft that you've spent so much time trying to master, like you're on the path, you know? So makes sense. And are there specific exhibitions that you're targeting, like PBE or Kokufu or something like that? Or
Well, you mean for me to show plants in?
yeah, I'm just saying, what's your North Star? Like which
My North
what?
Star would be the Pacific Bonsai Expo. I mean, I think if I ever, got something in that show, that would be really meaningful to me for a lot of reasons. It's a local show. There's people that I really admire and respect are behind it. A lot of my bonsai friends volunteer for it. I volunteered for the last one. The first one happened kind of just before I started working with bonsai, but I did you go to the 24 bonsai expo? So I helped Eric build that thing in the middle of the room.
Cool.
I mean, not prior to the show, but he brought it all there, and then I helped him put it together, and that was a great experience. But so, and again, I have no idea how long it would take me to have a tree that would pass the jury and get into that show. But I would like to show stuff at the Bonsai Society of San Francisco. I'm open to anything. Although, as I said, I think I'm years away from being there.
Yeah, the truth of it is just that if you're starting with trees that are 6 years from being in a show, it takes 6 years to get to the show point, right? So that's kind of been similar for me, where it's like I really started actually styling my trees 3 years ago. And so, if I'm starting with fairly raw stock like Yamadori just collected, or a tree that had just gone under its first styling 3 years ago, well, the truth of the matter is it really just takes time. Even if you're doing all the right things multiple years in a row, it just takes time to have a tree ready for the show. But I'm excited that some of my trees are hitting that point. Not like, the unfortunate part is a lot of the earlier trees I bought were really cheap. And so even if I make them look really good, it's like that $15 juniper from Lowe's is never going to be PBE, material, just because that's what I bought, right? But so I think you're doing the right thing of buying some nice, like high quality trees that have a future in the expo, like really early in your journey. That's something that, I mean, I had less disposable income 6 years ago or 3 years ago, whenever I was buying my material too, right? So it's kind of a necessity of the situation. But I think that's my number one suggestion for people who think they want to show trees in a high level exhibit. It all starts with buying the right material, and you might want to invest in that like nicer piece of material early on in your journey, and then it pays dividends later on.
Yeah. I'm also, I'm focusing largely on Shohin and small Kifu because, I can get it there quicker. I worked with Eric Schrader at his farm last week we were making a bunch of juniper mame, and that blew me away. And once again, I'm like, oh, wait a minute, I can make these little mame out of juniper and make them look like this. We were ginning it, making deadwood, and making some decisions on branching. It was a great exercise. I'm really grateful to Eric for letting me do that with him.
Yeah, have you noticed differences between? It sounds like you've been doing a lot of work with Eric and with Jonas. Are there differences to the kind of trees that they work with or their teaching styles?
Yeah, I mean, Jonas is I think largely focused on black pine, and I have more black pines than anything else. I was looking today, prior to our conversation, and I think out of the like 25 trees I have, I think 8 of them are black pines that I've got from either Eric or Jonas or Peter T. I got one from him. Eric is a grower. He is, I don't know if you've ever been out to his farm, but he has a lot of plants, and a lot of them are juniper that he's growing. But he also has, he has plenty of maples and everything else. So yeah, and as far as teaching style goes, I think they're both great teachers, but they're both very different people. I love going over to Jonas's place. even when I cut off the branch that he's been growing for 5 years, he'll be like, well, that's my fault because I didn't tell you not to cut it off. And and certainly Eric never yells at me about anything, but for it was a great exercise with the mame. He's like, go out with these 1,000 junipers and pick me out 10 that you think will make good mame that you would buy. So I went out and I did, I picked out 10. They were in gallon pots and I brought them back. And he looked at them all and I said, okay, put these back. Then he told me a little bit more detail of what I was looking for. And then I went back and got another 10 and he's picked out like 6 and we worked on those. So it was great, because I was able to learn, okay, this is, if I'm looking at a juniper to make it into a mame, these are the things, these are the cues that I need to look for of what would make it a good mame as opposed to a shohin. Because a lot of what I was bringing him was like, this needs to just keep running and be a shohin.
Give me a little bit more detail there. What were the criteria that set aside a mame from a shohin in the junipers?
Well, largely the motion in the trunk below 3 inches. And a lot of the trees, have been wired and then on-wired, including the branches. So what I was looking for was some interest in the trunk and multiple branches so that there were options. What he was more looking for, he would usually dump out some of the dirt so he'd get a little bit better look at the Nabari and what was going on down there. But he was also, at one point I said, I feel like I'm just holding you up. And he's like, well, I would hope that I would be 5 times faster than you on doing these because I don't have to spend so much time making a decision on which is the primary branch and, which branches can I live without and get rid of. Whereas I kind of living in fear of lopping something off and having to be, whether it's him or Jonas or anybody, it's like, oh my God, that was my favorite branch ever. Why did you take that off?
Yeah. That's such a cool exercise, I feel like, to be able to do the looking at 1,000 different trees. And I'm sure that was an amazing learning experience, like really to help train your eye when you have so many trees that you can compare to each other, right?
Well, it really was, and it really opened my eyes to juniper mame. I have some Cotoneaster mame that I'm playing with. But now, of course, the problem is that I want 15 juniper mame to work on, and I'm actually, I'm working with Adam Toth tomorrow, and then I signed up for his mame workshop at the Rendezvous. So I'm very excited about that. I think Eric actually provided Adam with the material for the workshop, although I'm not sure if it's juniper or what.
Awesome. Yeah, I've been taking classes with Adam, and especially targeted around shohin and mame juniper, and really, really been enjoying his teachings there. I went and visited his teacher's garden in Japan when I was there last time, Taiga Urashibata's garden, and just some really stunning examples of shohin junipers there. Yeah, I just wish we had that same kind of material pipeline that they have in Japan, because a lot of these are grown in nursery containers or like in pots. It just takes time, it's like a lot of these are 15-year grow projects, and we just haven't had that pipeline of people doing it really well for enough time for us to have that really, material that we can just buy off the shelf that's not exorbitantly expensive. Even if you do want to spend a lot of money, I'd say it's hard to find really good shohin juniper material.
That's something that is really interesting to me as I listen to podcasts and talk to people, is the fact that it seems like in a lot of ways bonsai in the United States is in its infancy, or very young. And I'm learning that it's like Eric spends a lot of time putting thought into what he's doing and how he's doing it, so that the future of bonsai in the United States can have some good material to work with. And that is, that's a long range vision. And I cannot wait to go to the Kokofu in February and see these trees. It's the 100th annual, which just there tells you, it's like there's no show in the United States that's any place close to 100 years. So I think that's going to be an incredible experience, and I'm extremely grateful to my wife for greenlighting that.
Yeah, I'm really excited for that as well. Hopefully we'll get to meet up there.
Yeah.
The thing about Kokofu though is it's almost overwhelming in that there's so many different things that you could choose to focus on and deep dive into and ask questions about, that you almost have to come with, like, I think I walked through the show like each weekend of it, maybe 2 or 3 times, like 2 or 3 days. And each time I walked through, I focused on a different thing. One time it was like, oh, I want to be able to identify the different eras of pots, like tell Kowatari from Nakawatari from Taisho from, current Gyozan or something like that, or like Tokoname. So that was one day of just like looking at and cataloging the pots and trying to figure out, things about the like what's the most common type of pot in the show and things like that. Another day could be just looking at the junipers, the large junipers. You could also do a whole day looking at the shohin, right? So it's almost overwhelmingly complex compared to the experience in the US because of the size of the show and the multiple weekends and the historical depth. So it's really a treat and definitely an amazing experience to have.
Well, and again, I feel incredibly lucky and grateful that I'm mostly going to tag along with Jonas. We've been talking a lot about what to see, and he's even asked me, what do you want to see other than bonsai? What do you want to do? And I was like, I don't know, sumo, sumo match or whatever. But hopefully that will give me some direction. One thing I do want to get some pots while we're there because I understand A, that they're incredible, and B, that they're fairly reasonably priced. But again, I was talking to Jonas about I'm going to bring thoughts, pictures of trees that I think need a new pot, and look for some guidance because I know very little about pots. I know the basics.
Yeah, no, that's a great one time when I went, my friend and I, we brought some photos of trees we wanted to get into a pot. And I mean, some of these nurseries or places where you're buying pots, they'll have, thousands of pots. So, and the apprentices are walking through and seeing those day after day. So you can go and ask them, say, hey, this is the tree, this is the size, like, could you suggest something? And they'll pull out 2 or 3 options for you and give you the prices. And yeah, so definitely is super feasible, as well as obviously Jonas is going to have a lot of expertise in helping you pick that out. But yeah, I went with Jonas and Andrew Robson my last trip, and yeah, the connections that they have, and the Japanese bonsai is so rich and deep, and having someone who has connections into that ecosystem or speaks Japanese, or working with someone over there who speaks English, you get to dig into these really cool concepts and thoughts that they have. Mm-hmm. And just get another level of depth. So it's definitely worth going with people that have that expertise.
Do you have any idea if Andrew's going this year?
I believe he is. Yeah.
Awesome.
I believe he is. Yeah. So it should be a great. I've heard a lot of people are going for the 100th, so it should be a really fun time, and I'm looking forward to seeing everybody and nerding out together.
Let's go.
Yeah, exactly. Hopefully, we're not hyping it up too much. I'm just assuming that they're going to do something special for the 100th, right? Because of the nature of the 100-year anniversary. But, I actually don't know. But yeah, we'll see. I'm assuming it'll be pretty darn good.
I'm sure there's trees that people have been sitting on for 7 years kind of thing, going like, I'm not putting it in until the 100th.
I think so. At
least that's my thought. So yeah, it'll be awesome.
So transitioning a little bit, I want to dive a little bit deeper into your learning journey so far. From your perspective as someone fairly new, what's been the single most intimidating or confusing aspect so far of learning bonsai?
Confusing? There's, with the general horticulture, there's a lot there. There's a lot to be learned. And I have a really hard time sometimes remembering the Latin names for things, kind of what's going on. But as far as, the one technique that I have that kind of mystifies me is wiring, because I have not done a ton of wiring. I've done some rudimentary wiring for movement in, juniper whips kind of thing. But, I haven't mentioned, I think as you did, I volunteer at the Bonsai Garden at Lake Merritt once a week, which is a fantastic opportunity. And I've unwired some of Peter T's work that he's done there, and it is just, amazing, the intricacy and what's been achieved. I went to the Rusasawa exhibit at the MoMA last week, and I don't know if you know Rusasawa, but she is famous for her bent wire hanging baskets kind of thing. She's a really famous artist here in San Francisco. And I was texting with Jonas while I was there, and I was like, this has really inspired me. I mean, this is amazing, the wire work that she's doing. I was like, has anybody ever taken a large bonsai that has been like intricately wired by somebody like Peter T and taken a fluoroscope picture of it or an x-ray picture of it so that, mostly you're just seeing the wire. I think that would be amazing. But, I don't have $10,000 to buy a fluoroscope, so somebody
Oh,
else
that
is
would be
going
so cool, actually. That would be
Yeah,
really cool art to do.
yeah, I
Yeah, that
think
would
it
be
would.
fascinating. And I mean, we spend so much time learning how to wire aesthetically in an aesthetically pleasing way. It would seem like a
Mhm.
cool way to highlight that. I wonder if it could even be used as like a training tool, right? Like get the foliage out of the way and, be able to measure in a more objective way how good it is, right? How aesthetically pleasing it looks whenever it's just a wire. That's an interesting concept. Yeah. If anybody wants to sponsor a $10,000
Yeah, let
fluoroscope,
us know. Get in touch.
or maybe we could partner with some kind of research, somebody who has one. That would be really cool.
Yeah, I think it would be
That's a
very
fascinating
interesting.
concept, actually. I would love that. Love to see what that looked like. Yeah, wiring is tough, and I think it's pretty punishing in that you start doing it and it's not easy at the beginning, or even in the middle, or even at the end, right? So it's always. I mean, you start to gain kind of intuition for it, and you know maybe at first if you have to rewire the whole thing because you messed up everything, and then you get some of it right in your next wiring whenever you do it on the new tree, and then you start to get everything mostly functional, and then you start to focus on aesthetics. So it just takes a really long time and a lot of hours, so it's not something that can develop really quickly, at least in my experience. So I wouldn't get discouraged, and I would just, you got to put in the hours wiring, and over time you'll get a good feel for it. So it's just something that takes time.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely understand the principle behind it and the basics, but it's a thing, And back to the food analogy. It's funny. I always do this when I'm working with Jonas, talk about food, but it's like I'm really great at making stock, like a beef stock or a chicken stock, and I love doing that. But then making a consomme is just like a whole exponentially different level of intricacy because it's a stock on steroids kind of thing. And so the wiring, I guess that's what my feeling is with wiring right now, is that it's fascinating and mystifying.
Yeah. Well, I'll say that, my first 4 years of bonsai, I never really got anywhere with wiring. Like I tried a few times and just it was kind of opaque to me. I don't think I was learning in the right manner. Like I wasn't taking classes with people and getting direct feedback. Like you kind of have to do that to learn it. And I wasn't. I was just kind of trying it on my own.
Hmm.
And then 3 years ago, I kind of shifted my focus and made this commitment to like get better at the art aspect of bonsai. And really, you kind of need to wire to make that happen, to like style trees, right? At least conifers. So I, yeah, I've kind of embarked on that journey, and it slowly started to demystify. But the thing is that these people that are really, really strong at wiring, they've spent, you know,
A
hundreds,
long
thousands
time.
of hours. Exactly. So I would say, like, for anybody who's feeling that same challenge, I think that's a very common challenge for beginners. Like, just embrace that you're not going to do it perfectly your first time, and just try to get better at each tree that you do.
I'm pretty sure that tomorrow I'm going to bring a Coast Redwood to Adam that I wired in a workshop at Eric Schrader's. And I'm pretty sure his first question is going to be, who the heck wired this thing? And it's fair enough. And I'm just going to say, you know what? I'm new here. Show me
He'll
how to
tell
do it
you,
better.
he'll tell you for sure. But I think for wiring, like you really need someone who, I've been lucky that my kind of mentors in wiring, like Sam Tan and Todd Schlafer and Adam Toth, all are really, really, they'll tell you if you mess up. And like, I think you
Hmm.
really need that in wiring, or at least I did, right? Where you almost don't see, like you can kind of tell if it's functional or not, right? If it's wiggly, like you kind of know you messed up. But having someone who's able to do that technique at a high level and isn't afraid to tell you that you could like hold you to a high standard, I think is the most
Hmm.
important thing about learning wiring.
Yeah, agreed.
Cool. All right. Any other kind of aha moments in your bonsai journey so far, or kind of topics that you think are you wish you would have approached a little bit differently? Honestly, from what you've described so far of the start to your practice of buying high quality trees, working really closely with very credible people, hands on, doing a lot of your learning hands on, sounds like you're taking all the right steps to, like, I wish I would have started my journey that way. So it sounds like you're all taking all the right steps, but I'm curious if there's any other kind of stumbling blocks that you've run into, or if there's any moments where you had like a big breakthrough.
Well, I mean, I think that as far as aha moments go, in my head, I think of myself as a black pine guy these days partly because, I've worked on a lot of them in the last couple of months at Jonas's garden, but I've learned to, I guess, appreciate the beauty of them. And I now know, or I feel like I know some of the mechanics behind keeping them alive and leading them towards looking better. I have a lot of stuff out on my bench. I have a couple of hornbeams. I've got a Japanese maple. I've got, bougainvillea and a wisteria and an elm and et cetera, et cetera. But I think once again, back to the aha moment, it's like, okay, maybe I have to specialize. Or not specialize, but, have a focus. And in kitchens, it's like you have a pastry chef, you have a butcher, you have the saucier, people that have a good broad knowledge of everything that's going on in the kitchen, but has one thing that they kind of like to make shine. And, that has been an aha moment. I again will say that I'm incredibly lucky that, I don't know if it's just because I'm an old guy and they felt sorry for me or what, but, I responded to Jonas's, he wrote on his blog about looking for garden help, and I signed up and that worked out. And Eric did a couple of workshops with him, and then started bugging him for work. And I'm like, I send him, here are dates that I'm free to help you. And he's a little, I gotta keep bugging him. But when we do work together, it's really great. I actually have been helping his wife, Dory, with their workshops. They do bonsai workshops like in bars for beginners and using jade. And that's fun. It's, it's very base level work. I personally am not a jade guy, but I understand why they're used, because they're almost indestructible and they're easy to work with and you can get them there quick. But yeah, I made the mistake, I think yesterday, on making a derogatory comment about jade bonsai on Reddit, and just got blown up with people, giving me pictures of these incredible, because somebody posted this jade and it was like a big stick, and they're like, hey, do you think this is a literati? And I was like, I said what I usually say on Reddit, which is join a club, read a book, buy good material, But then I think I threw in, and that jade is not good material. And people are like, oh, well, here's my thing. And I said, I'm like, that's an incredible bonsai. That's obviously, 50 years of work, and you should be very proud of yourself. It's amazing. But, I'm getting a little bit tired of getting blown up. I'm like,
Oh, that's
take it
so
easy.
funny.
Yeah.
Yeah. The bonsai subreddit is so funny. I enjoy it,
Well,
but
you
I
got
don't know
to,
that. I don't know that I've learned a lot from it, but it's fun to see the drama whenever somebody posts a brown juniper and is like, is it still, how is it doing?
yeah, it's like, people literally post, it's like, it's the Daily Dead juniper, roadside juniper picture.
Yeah,
It's like,
exactly.
and that actually kind of kills me because, the Pacific Bonsai Expo and people like Jonas and Eric and yourself and Mike Postillo and all of these people are doing really good bonsai, and people don't necessarily, what am I trying to say? The public at large doesn't really know what good bonsai is.
Totally.
They think it's a little ficus in a little square pot, or they think it's a little Procumbens, juniper, and it's like it can just be so much more, and that frustrates me a little bit that people are like, oh yeah, I got a bonsai. And so I'm like, oh, do you? Yeah, cool.
Yeah, that's an interesting one, that the public perception of the art is very different than the professionals, or the actual hobbyists' perspective of it, which is very interesting. Yeah, that's definitely, there needs to be more education out there about bonsai, and I'm just excited that the community at large is growing in general, and it's on an upward trajectory, and we have these people putting so much energy into creating great events and shows. So I'm excited about that aspect of it. And I think that bed of people who understand good bonsai, or can appreciate it, is only going to grow. So I'm excited about
Yeah.
that.
Yep.
Awesome.
Great.
Well, I'm looking forward to seeing your first pine in the show, so I'm going to be anxiously awaiting that. Also would love to, check in sometime after you've got another year under your belt or whatever, and we can look back on this and say like, oh yeah, like I was doing this correct. Like the decision to focus on a few species was good or was bad. That's the topic that I want to explore further is, yeah, should you, like my gut is that you should specialize initially so that you're not getting overwhelmed and so you can get more reps within your collection on a specific set of trees and like learn more deeply. But, you also should be able to potentially work on a wide variety of trees, right, to really master bonsai. So it's an interesting question.
That is one thing that we didn't touch on really. Again, with regards to culinary and bonsai, is the culinary can be very immediate gratification. It's like you get a beautiful halibut in. It's like, oh, I'm going to run a special tonight, and I'm going to put this with it and that with it, and you cook it and you send it out, and you get pretty immediate feedback on, wow, that's amazing, or boy, I hated that. But with the bonsai, obviously, it's like, okay, I'm gonna make this cut, I'm gonna make that cut, I'm going to fertilize it like this, and then next year I'll see how I did. So
Yeah,
that is definitely a shift as far as the immediate gratification goes.
absolutely. Yeah, that's the hardest thing for me about bonsai is I don't necessarily have an intuition for if I do this thing at year 1 and then repeat that, I'm going to get this product at year 5. Like that's what I've been searching for, or really, that's what I've really been yearning for is, I want to know that what I'm doing at each step of the journey ends up with X product. And it's just something that's hard to get without doing it over multiple years and figuring out what you get. Right. So, I mean, obviously you hopefully you're studying with someone consistently and then they're leading you down that path that they've already taken, right? But it still can be daunting.
I would say that the people that we consider our mentors that have been doing this for 25 or 30 years probably had a lot fewer resources than what we have now. There wasn't the internet back there. There was nobody was doing bud pinching on YouTube. There were no podcasts and stuff to listen to. There was books to read and stuff. I mean, I've got a bonsai today right here and Mastering Black Pines, and that was kind of where you got it, or working with somebody. So I guess what I'm saying is that you and I have a step up as far as the information highway goes.
Absolutely. Awesome. Well, this has been super fun, Mark. I really enjoyed hearing about your kind of transition into retirement, as well as what we can take from our careers and move over into bonsai. And so hearing about some of the things that are different and the same with your culinary career is really fascinating. So yeah, thank you very much for taking the time. I really appreciate it. Anything you want to plug on the podcast before we end up?
I got nothing to plug other than,
okay.
Support Jonas Dupuis, support Eric Schrader, support your local bonsai club, and support Addison Galambos, who's about to be in a big show and a competition. I'm excited to see what happens with that.
Oh gosh, yeah. If you want to bring some, I don't know, some foam fingers or something like that, I could definitely use I'm going to need all the help I can get. But
I'll get a bunch of people to get your faces on a stick. You know how they do that?
Okay, well, that might be distracting. We'll see. But I appreciate the sentiment.
Okay.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Mark. Really appreciate it. And for all of you listening, if there's anything along this journey that Mark shared that you relate with, don't hesitate to reach out. You can find me at Teeny Trees on Instagram. Mark, you have an Instagram as well, right? Mark, is that correct? I don't know if you want folks to message you.
Sure. Yeah. It's Chef Bonsai SF.
All right. Awesome. Well, great to meet and chat with a fellow San Franciscan bonsai hobbyist. And looking forward to seeing you around.
Okay. Thanks so much. See ya.